There again. Once again, I find myself being criticised more for what I have failed to say than what I actually have said. It will be recalled that several days ago, some people were annoyed that I didn't cover in sufficient detail political events in France. And this morning I find myself under fire for not speaking about the three women who died recently, supposedly as a result of being shot with a crossbow. The suggestion is that this is racist because sometimes I invite people to guess the ethnicity or nationality of those wanted for strange crimes, and in this case I failed to do so. The reason was, of course, that I didn't see anything particularly strange or out of the ordinary about the case. I write a great deal about crime in this country. In the description to this video, I give links to a few of my books on the subject. I used to do a lot of stuff for True Detective magazine at one time. Because of this interest, I've been able to spot a curious trend in crime in Britain, and this is why I sometimes play what I call Guess the Ethnicity. You see, historically, murder in this country is very much a domestic affair. It always has been. It's carried out indoors between relatives and friends. In the last few years, there has been a trend towards making killing people an outdoor pursuit, and also for the victims to be strangers rather than members of the family of the killer. We see this with most knife crime, for example, and also the majority of shootings in Britain. English people still tend to stick to indoors and keep it in the family, so to speak, but those outdoor murders of strangers are generally the work of people whose families are either immigrants or foreigners. This is intriguing. One thinks, for example, of the stabbing rampages that we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years, which typify this phenomenon. As soon as I heard about the three deaths in Bushey, though, it was obvious to me that this was a domestic crime, in that it took place indoors and the wanted man was formerly the boyfriend of one of the victims. This was not an unusual offence, other than the fact that the weapon used was a crossbow. I accordingly didn't think it worth mentioning or talking about. Generally speaking, it is unusual and out of the ordinary deaths which are likely to involve those whose families have their roots outside this country. This is, of course, a cultural or national effect rather than being directly associated with ethnicity. The two things do rather coincide most of the time. It's curious to note that something similar, same sort of trend, can be seen in unusual homicides going back centuries in this country. To give one example, in 1887, a young woman in London was murdered by being forced to drink nitric acid. I have never heard of such a crime being committed before or since. It was definitely a one-off and a most peculiar crime. The killer was called Israel Lipski, and he was from Poland. I must apologise for not covering the business in Bushey before, but as I say, there really was little to distinguish his deaths from many others, except that the weapon used was out of the ordinary and the fact that there was more than one victim. It did not occur to me for a moment to think that this crime was particularly odd or worth talking about.